Welcome back. This is the introduction to part three of the course. And if you're watching this, I want to say, first of all, congratulations for making it through parts one and two. You've now completed approximately two-thirds of the course. So the end point is in sight, making that last push towards the end, which I hope you'll make it a good one. And I hope this introductory talk will help you prepare as you begin to work on part three. Part three consists of three lectures. The Age of Discovery, Trades, Slavery, and then the World System. And this is material that I've kind of hinted at previously in previous lectures in terms of the Reformation and absolutism, mercantilism, and some of those things. And so it's kind of a continuation thereof. There's still a bit of a chronological disjunction with the textbook, even though it's beginning to catch up and be more or less the same. The readings for this part of the course in the textbook cover material that I covered in the lectures in part two. Therefore, that's still part of the course material. Now, again, how do you handle some of that? Well, look at the list of the terms to know. That will really help you. It doesn't mean that you can forget everything from part two or part one, but in terms of sifting through the overlap and all the new material, use the terms, the list of terms to know to help you with that. You should also perhaps begin by looking at the exam for part three. That will tell you what is expected, what I hope you'll get out of it, and what you will have to do in 3 weeks or so when you finish part three. And that final question, exam question, and again, focusing on the essay because the terms are different terms, certainly, than in the first exam and the second exam, but the basic approach is the same. The same basic approach to writing the essay is the same, in that you'll need to state a position and defend it with evidence brought from the course material. So that part hasn't changed. And again, that document historical argument, I think, is important for all of the exams. But the question, of course, is different, and the material that is covered is different. And if you look at that question, it's really asking what is world history? Because we can see developments in this third part of the course, whereby the world becomes really connected, interconnected. And I think I mentioned previously, either in the lectures or in one of the talks, that the old-fashioned way to approach a lot of this material, this chronological developments in the 16th, 17th, on into the 18th century, was under the guise of European expansion. And your textbook rather refers to it that way as such, because it refers to it as the age of European hegemony. Now, hegemony is a great word. Hegemony means control over. So if we have a hegemonic relationship, that's one party controlling the other party. Not so much necessarily in a one-to-one relationship. It's not quite like a master-slave relationship, but it is that the person or the entity that has hegemony can determine at least the possibilities for the powers under their authority, or the entities under their authority. So it's really a centralized authority, if that makes sense. I mean, I have hegemonic control of this course, actually. That doesn't mean that you don't participate or can't participate, but I set the rules. That is somewhat what hegemony means. And you can say, yes, you're just being a dictator, and maybe I am, but kind of like, well, so then I am. But I'm just using that example to illustrate the term and what's meant by the term. So it's not necessarily direct governing control, but it is the ability to set the rules or to impose rules. And we really see that emerging with the Age of Exploration and the emergence of colonialization. And then what Emanuel Wallerstein referred to as the world system. Now, the third lecture in part three is titled The World System, and the essay question on the exam for part three is asking about the world system and whether or not we can only really begin to talk about world history when we see the emergence of the world system. Now, obviously, the history of the world uh, goes all the way back to the very beginnings, and that there were histories of individual peoples and groups and cultures and societies that we've been looking at up to this point. But what it's getting at is, to what extent is there then this connectivity of a world connected, for the most part, that then that itself becomes world history as distinct from individual countries, governments, peoples, cultures. Now, obviously, even with the world system, it doesn't necessarily include everyone. And Wallerstein, as we'll be hearing or reading, talks about the core and the periphery. That's I'll get to there when I get there. But it's this overarching web of connections. So that's the question posed to you: is do we see world history as the emergence and development of a world system where there is, let's say, global connectivity? Now, I don't mean to jump on the word globalization because of all the connotations that come with it. But in some ways, we could phrase it as, is world history only world history once we have globalization, once we have the interconnectivity of these various entities that remain independent entities. That's one of the definitions of a system. A system is a functional relationship between component parts. And so it is kind of like saying a system is something greater than the sum of its parts, because it works together. And that's what it really is getting at. And the question is world history really the history of this system, even if not explicitly as Wallerstein described it? But it's distinct from the histories of the individual components themselves. I guess that's the point. So it's looking at the whole. And so the question is asking, based on the material that is being presented to you in the textbook and the lectures, how would you address that thesis, being the thesis that's given to you that you're supposed to defend or refute, that world history really only becomes world history with the emergence of the world system? Now, if you have questions about that at the beginning, or even questions that come up along the way, because I can see maybe you're listening to this and saying, oh, that makes a lot of sense. And then you start reading the lectures and you start reading the textbook assignments. I believe it's book 4. And you think, wait a minute, maybe this doesn't make sense. Please, again, reach out to me. Now, one of the characteristics of the lectures for this part of the course is, first of all, they are in general shorter than previous lectures, but also they all include material from outside that I brought in. Now, there is, I think, in the first lecture, Age of Exploration, I think there's a rather, well, they're all rather lengthy inserts, but a letter of Columbus, from Columbus. There is then again in the third lecture a rather lengthy section summarizing Wallerstein's position. So it's not his own words, but it is a summary of his position. And then in the second lecture for this on trade and slavery, I believe there's a couple of articles that I included in the lecture on slavery and colonialization. So those materials are not simply extra, they're part of the course material. So please read them. They're there included in different font, so it'll be clear what is me and what is not me, so to speak. And you can use those inserts, I'm just going to call them inserts for now, as part of the evidence on which to build your case. And if you are going to argue a position that seems to conflict with the evidence, then explain it. You have to deal with it. You can't, again, with argument, you can't simply point to the evidence that supports your position. You have to also address the evidence that would seem to undermine your position, and then show how that really is not the case. That's the trick to the exam. You can say that, okay, this might seem to undermine my position. You can argue either way in terms of the world system question. Question for the exam for part 3. It doesn't really matter. I mean, I think implicitly my position is clear that in some ways we can say that world history only begins with the world system or globalization. Um, but that is not hard and fast, and that is certainly not completely demonstrated. And done that, we move on. It is very much a conceptualization, and that's what this is getting at. How do we conceive of? How do we conceptualize world history? And you can say, well, no, actually, that system is artificial, and it seems to be apparent um, to describe what was going on, but actually, there wasn't any real interconnectivity. There was various attempts to establish hegemony by individual nation states. So the system, seen from any one of those components of the system, so to speak, was either one of attempted dominators or subjected dominees. I mean, that's not really a very good way to put it, but that is kind of what colonizers and the colonies. Um, and you could argue that point, that if we really want to understand what's going on, we have to look at those individual components that are far more important for understanding world history than is the system itself. But anyway, you can argue either way, but you need to take all the evidence that is presented into account. And how you do so, as with exam 1 and exam 2, is the basis for grading your exam. How well do you present your case based on the course material? I don't mean to keep harping on that, but that is the basic point of every exam, and even the final essay. How do you deal with the course material that's presented and assigned to you? Do you ignore it? Do you pretend it's not there? Excuse me. Do you go just do what you think and believe independently of the course material? How do you handle it? And that's what this is getting at. So, okay, here is the given. What do you do with it? What do you make of it? And why? And what is your evidence? And again, this is not a question about beliefs or opinions or feelings. It is an argument for a position. So again, if you have any questions about this or any parts of it along the way, please reach out to me. That's not a problem at all. We can set up a Zoom session and talk about it. I think this is a really important and exciting part of this course because we really see the dynamics that are still at play in so many ways in the world in which we live. And to understand that background is, I think, essential for understanding our world today and our place in it and where we're going from here. So that's kind of the broader picture. And it all starts with part 3 as the emerging new world was based on what had come before. This is not a development that is simply kind of brought in from on high and imposed. It is a development. And so, for example, in the lecture on the scientific revolution, there's a whole section on medieval science, because that has been so radically misunderstood, so ahistorically understood. And to see the scientific revolution for what it was, we have to at least have a good historical understanding of what came before. And so what is really revolutionary about it? And there were revolutionary things about it, but often not in the way that it has been portrayed. So those are the aspects that we need to realize, that history is a continuous process of development, newness, and how do we make sense of it all. That's what this is all about. I hope you'll enjoy it. I hope you'll be challenged by it, meaning be confronted with ideas that could make you think. And again, that's the whole purpose of this, is to make you think. I want to see how you think. That's what the exam is about. How do you think and put it all together? And I'm, as always, here to help. So good luck, enjoyment, and I will be back with a video talking to terms. So preparing for exam 3, which 2 will be rather short because I've already hopefully set that up well here, and we'll go from there. We're getting there. The end is in sight. Bring it home. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.